Hey everyone, my name's Gunther, and welcome back to Igua Zoo. In today's episode, we are adding our collared peccary into Igua Zoo, and I'm really excited to finally play around with this anniversary animal. In all the time, I've never had this animal placed in any of my zoos, and that's going to change today. Now, the first thing we're going to start with is going to be some pathing, and you'll notice that we are dealing with some of the natural topography of the map. We have quite a bit of drop in the terrain here, and I really want to work this into the habitat. And we're going to start off with a quaint little viewing station, and this is going to give our guests access to all sides of the habitat, as well as an additional view of our alpaca habitat that we built previously for Igua Zoo. Now, on top of that, we're going to work in this really cool looking center viewing station. This is going to be a drop down into one of our hard shelters. Just give us, our guests, a little bit of extra viewing attention, and can't go wrong with that. With our viewing station kind of planned out, it's really time for us to start working on our habitat walls. And you're going to notice that we're utilizing a lot of the rock work, and it's all faux rock. When you think about a habitat, I really want to focus on creating something that's going to be a little bit more realistic. We're not going to see a lot of natural rock work here because we need to form it around the habitat itself. Now, that being said, there is always place for natural rock work, and that's going to be the interior of the habitat. So with all of our walls set up, it's really time for us to start planning out all of the rock work. And while I did mention that our viewing station is going to have a over-the-top view into the den, it doesn't mean that we necessarily need to have all sides open. We're going to have a hidden entrance to the den, so our guests don't necessarily see where that entrance is going to be, but they will have a perfect top-down view of that. Now, for the rock work today, we are focusing really on just 3 types, and the entire idea of utilizing this rock is to help fill in these 3 natural areas where our peccary are going to be able to hang out. Our first area is going to be this top section. You can already see it taking shape. We're also going to utilize this natural rock work to create some steps for our collared peccary to traverse from one side to the other, and we'll also utilize this on the other side of the habitat as well. Again, really trying to focus on creating something that's going to look really natural and work really well with the terrain that we have here. This is the first time that we're really focusing on utilizing the natural topography for the habitat, and it's an additional challenge that's not unwelcome in this case. Adding some terrain paint to really flesh it out and give it a little bit more of a lifelike appearance, and then closing off the left-hand side with some larger rocks, our first area is starting to come to shape. Now, originally, when I had this idea, I wanted to create 3 distinct areas from a foliage perspective, but I realized that might be a little jarring, so instead I opted to add in some of these dynamic mossy rocks. These are going to help to add a splash of color to the rest of the habitat, and it's going to work really well with a lot of the foliage that we place after the fact. So with some final rocks and much more placed off camera, we're really ready to start on our first barrier. Now, there's nothing too fancy when it comes to this particular barrier. We're utilizing some of our temple stones. This is going to keep the theme of the entire zoo running, while at the same time providing something that's going to look a little bit more natural and fits with all the surrounding rock work. So really quickly placing 2 pieces on top of each other, and then taking this curved barrier as well. This is going to act as a way for us to keep our guests on the outside of the habitat. We're pretty much ready to go. Now, on top of that, you are going to see on the inside, we added an additional curved rock. The idea behind having this curved rock is it's to prevent our collared peccary from being able to escape from the habitat. I am worried that it is a little too low, so this is just some additional protection for both the peccary and our guests. Now, you are going to notice that in one section, we do have a different type of barrier. I opted to initially go for a glass barrier here, and admittedly, it looked really cool, but it just didn't fit the rest of the theme of the habitat, so knowing that, I did go back and swap it out after the fact. So with all of our barriers finally placed down, it is time for us to move on to our foliage. And this is always the most exciting part of our build because this is really where everything kind of starts to come together. We're seeing a lot of things start to pop. It's going to look a little bit more natural looking, and I love the way it turned out. Now, this is actually going to be the first time I've worked with the desert palette in any way from a foliage perspective. So I'm really excited to kind of get your feedback on how this came together. Now, on top of that, this was also built on stream, got tons of feedback while I was building this live, and if you want to join the streams in the future, make sure you hit that subscribe button. That'll let you know the next time I'm streaming. Typically, I try to stream every weekend, and we always focus on building something new for one of the zoos. If there is one thing that I loved about working with this palette, it has to be the barrel cacti. I love the way it looked. It's the first time I've utilized them. I did try to fit in some of the more traditional looking cactus, but it didn't really fit that well with this particular habitat. especially knowing how small the collared peccary are. I was expecting them to be a lot larger, and then when I finally placed them in, I was shocked with how small they were, which I guess goes to show how often I do go and check out some of the animals. Now, there is one exception to my traditional rule, which is not utilizing any foliage from a pallet that's not available to the animal. And in this case, it's going to be the Nitraria bush. I realize that it doesn't fit with the rest of the theme, but the bush looks amazing. Can't go wrong with it. So I did try to place them in a few different areas. Now, on top of that, I realized that the interior of the habitat is kind of getting a little bland. Realizing that we're working with a desert palette means that we can't really have a lot of foliage spread out. We don't have that trusted buffalo grass that we can sink in everywhere. And while we can place a lot of rocks, the faux rocks in any case doesn't really work out. So utilizing one of the rock pieces from Caesar Creates pack, I did place them sunken into the ground. You actually might have seen me utilize this in our Cedarbrook Park Zoo for our Australian house, and it worked really well, so I felt that this would actually work here as well. I can't go wrong. So this helps to break up some of the sight lines, how flat that land is. We're dealing with a lot of the natural topography, but right here it is awfully flat, so this just adds an additional little level of detail here. So with some additional small details when it comes to foliage, it is time for us to really take a look at how everything's turned out for this particular area. And here is an easy way for you to see what it was before to what it is now. And I say now because we are going to be changing that barrier. You'll see that happen in the final little bits of this episode. Now, I'm not going to bore you with even more foliage work. I think this is a dime a dozen. You've seen this all over the place. Now that we have a taste for the palette, it's time for us to really work on kind of diversifying or improving how flat this landscape is. We've placed another rock feature here, and now it's really time for us to focus on utilizing all of our faux rocks. And you've seen a lot of different people do this before. You place down some of your faux rocks, you put it all on the same grid, and then you place it deeper into the ground. And this is really what it looks like when you've done that. We did have to adjust quite a bit of the color as well, but in the end, it really kind of popped. It's time for us to finally work on the last major piece of this habitat build, which is going to be this viewing station. And don't worry, there were quite a few jokes about this maybe being my largest sunshade ever, and it probably is. Now, we are using some of the pieces that we made in earlier episodes, specifically our alpaca episode. This barrier works really well, and I kind of like the way it fits the entire motif. For the sunshade itself, we are building a framework for this. It is going to be a rather large sunshade, which means we need lots of support. But you might notice this is not being built on the same grid as the path, and that's by design. Oftentimes, especially when it comes to paths, it's very easy to start building off-grid, and then your builds don't line up. Normally, you would adjust your grid to make it work, but in this case, I want to build it on grid, and then we'll just twist it just a little bit to make it work. So while everything looks a little haphazard right now, things are definitely going to come together when we get to the final end. You can also see me adding in some additional elbows for that extra support. And now here you can see why it was important for us to build the framework on the grid, because when we add the roof, it's going to be on a separate build piece. It's going to make it look a lot easier, and we can adjust it a little bit faster than if we'd had to maybe twist and turn it everything around. Now, we have been left with this rather garish looking opening, and we could go the easy route, place a flat panel there and call it a day, but I want to make this a little bit more exciting. So knowing that, we add more framework, we lift it up just a tad, and then we add in some of these barriers. Really like the way these barriers work out. I will admit I did swap them out for something a little bit less green, because unfortunately they're not FlexiColor. So Planet Zoo, if you're watching this video, please keep in mind I would love to have everything as FlexiColor as opposed to just having individual pieces. But things are really starting to come together, and then when we add in the roof on top of that, we adjust the color. We've created a really awesome looking sunshade for our peccary habitat. And while we have tons of different viewing angles, this is going to be the prime spot for everybody to get the best views of the peccary. And you can see we've taken it from this very bland piece to this nice looking gazebo. Now, of course, nothing ever is complete when it comes to Planet Zoo. There's always going to be these little details that you can add in, and this is a perfect example. We have our barrier, our guests aren't going to fall in, but adding in this additional fence just to lift that barrier a little bit higher adds so much more additional detail, and I love the way it looks. And just like that, we've added the Collared Peccary to Igua Zoo. We are one step closer to being completed. And I think it's time for us to take a quick look at how this zoo has changed with the addition of this habitat. So if you look in the bottom right hand side, you are going to see the addition of the Collared Peccary. And just like that, I think we've accomplished exactly what we wanted to today. And with all of that hard work complete, it's now easy to see just how lovely these peccary fit in with this new habitat. In fact, you can see them hanging out, running around, enjoying all of the shade, the hidden areas, as well as our different varied styles of builds. And it's easy to see just how utilizing the natural topography of this map has really worked out with creating something super iconic for a Collared Peccary habitat. If I have to say, this is going to be my favorite habitat that we've added into Igua Zoo by far. And in fact, it's not just the Collared Peccary that's going to benefit from this viewing station. If we look a little to our left, we can also see our alpaca habitat, a whole new viewing angle that's going to incorporate a second habitat, which again, is something that was truly a magnificent decision. And you can't go wrong with this beautiful sightline of the mountains off in the distance. And with that, we have finished our Collared Peccary habitat for Igua Zoo. There's definitely lots of learnings here for me, working with various topography, trying to make it look as natural as possible. And I think that this might be just one of my best habitats yet. If you agree, or if you disagree, if there's something I could have done differently, let me know in the comments below, because your feedback really helps me to grow, and I'm sure it helps everybody else to grow as well. Otherwise, I just want to say thank you so much for all of your support and helping me to become a better Planet Zoo player and builder. Really could not have done this without you. Otherwise, and as always, I just want to say thank you and ciao for now.